This channel is only possible thanks to direct contributions from viewers like Kronos, Karazin Magi, Argus, Milk, Bleed Red, Aria Reed, Christopher Welch, Jacob Sandoval, and you. If you'd like to contribute to making more videos like this possible, you can do so for as little as $1 a month on Patreon, or by buying a t-shirt at the merch store. Thanks a bunch, and I hope you enjoy the show. Hey gamers, Taz here, and today we're going to talk about Classpects, specifically the Blood aspect, the Prince and Bard classes, and a little game you might have seen taking Twitter, Tumblr, and YouTube by storm recently, Supergiant Games' latest outing, Hades. A little background for those of you not in the know, Hades is an action roguelike set in the titular Greek Underworld. You play as the prince of said underworld, Zagreus, who has recently decided to break himself out of the realm of the dead, which he can only do by fighting through the armies of his dad, also the titular Hades. Zagreus is aided in this endeavor by the Olympian gods. You know, the roster of gods that you're more likely to be familiar with from the Greek pantheon. Now, you might not think it because roguelikes are generally driven more by action and game mechanics, but Hades is actually a very story-driven game with a lot of narrative and relationship building. And since Homestuck's Classpects system is primarily a tool for characterization, that's what we're mostly going to be talking about today, which means that this video contains spoilers for the entirety of Hades. So if you haven't played this game yet and you think you want to, this is your chance to duck out. For the rest of us, let's dive in. So in Homestuck, the Blood aspect is one of the 12 fundamental forces that create paradox space. Among other things, Blood is connected to ideas of responsibility, commitment, feeling bound to the world of your actual reality, as opposed to residing in the world of dreams, imagination, and fantasy that relate more to its opposing aspect of breath. And maybe most importantly, to the idea of violence, both in the sense of actual physical violence, as in drawing blood, as well as its lesser known but more descriptive, in my opinion, definition, the forceful removal or limitation of choice. And the idea of family, as in bloodlines. Though the Blood aspect isn't so literally focused on the actual blood connections between people, so much as just the idea of people who are so closely bound together by mutual commitment and shared history that they exert a unique and special sort of power over each other that can be used to both hurt and help. And Hades is kind of the perfect game to explore that reading of blood because, well, has there ever been a more famous family for both helping and hurting each other than the Greek pantheon itself? So, Zagreus' character resonates with the Blood aspect in many ways, some of them pretty surface level and obvious. In one codex entry, Achilles literally identifies Zagreus as a god of blood. Like Karkat I, Homestuck's Knight of Blood, Zagreus is known to get very little sleep, only sleeping once to have a dream flashback that enlighten us about the nature of his family, i.e. his blood ties. In this dream, he discovers that the goddess of night, Nyx, was not in fact his real mother, and that his real mother was the former queen of the Underworld, who left Hades for reasons that are left completely mysterious at the start of the game, though we'll eventually learn that the queen was Persephone, the daughter of Demeter, the Olympian goddess of seasons, and that she left the Underworld because Zagreus himself died for a period of time, before eventually being reborn, but only after the damage to Hades and Persephone's relationship had already been done. So in essence, Zagreus' birth, death, and rebirth indirectly caused the destruction of his parents' relationship. And then finding out the truth about his mother and that Hades and Nyx lied to him essentially destroys Zagreus' relationship with the both of them as well, putting him in a position to then rebuild and redefine his relationships with both of them over the course of the game. I'm identifying Zagreus as either a prince or bard according to Homestuck's Classpects system, and this dynamic of destruction and renewal is the primary reason why. Zagreus is identified as a prince textually in the game. He is the prince of the Underworld after all, and mythologically the figure of the prince has always been tied up in the idea of revolution, particularly against unjust and corrupt kings. It's the basic idea of tearing down a status quo to make way for a new one, an act of destruction carried out so that renewal can take its place. Homestuck literally defines the prince class as a destruction class first and foremost. According to the equation that we're given for how the class functions, Zagreus would be defined as one who destroys blood or destroys through blood, if he were a prince. But in Homestuck's Classpects system, a bard is a very similar figure to a prince. It is also associated strongly with royalty, and it is also a destruction class. The only difference between the bard and the prince is that the prince is the active destroyer, while the bard is the passive one. If we consider Zagreus a bard, the definition would be more along the lines of one who allows the destruction of blood to take place, or invites the destruction of blood, as if the nebulous metaphysical concept of blood itself was a sentient force acting through Zagreus and impacting the world around him, using him as a vessel. I think that early definition describes his effects on his family early in life a lot better, because it's so unintentional on his part. Passive classes like the Bard are also typically known for being very selfless and giving individuals, very interested in the people around them. And that does describe Zagreus very well, particularly later into his arc. But he does have some traits that particularly resonate with the prince. Particularly, his entire rebellion and escape attempt is very willful and self-motivated, which is something associated more with active classes. Basically everyone around Zagreus, except for Nyx, is trying to talk him out of the attempt, or verbally punishing him for doing it. But he's undeterred. Zagreus knows what he wants, and he's going to get it. In the end, I think when it comes to most stories, the active-passive distinction is mostly so vague that it's kind of arbitrary. So honestly, I'm just going to say that Zagreus could fit either Destroyer class very well, and leave it to whoever talks about this in the comments or on Tumblr and Twitter if I'm lucky enough to get any arguments going there, as to whether you all want Zagreus to look like this or like this. You're welcome. In any case, almost every relationship Zagreus has over the course of this game falls into one of two categories. The first is the kinds of relationships we just talked about, where these early revelations and events in Zagreus' life kind of destroy his relationships with the people around him, and then he spends the rest of the game building them back up. Besides Hades and Nyx, the other two big ones that fall into this category are Zagreus' love interests, Megara the Fury, and Thanatos, the god of peaceful death. Megara and Zagreus are implied to be exes by the time the game starts. At some point in the past, presumably while Zagreus was kind of a miserable fuck-up working for his dad, he said a lot of kind of arrogant, boastful shit somewhere, and that led to him falling out of favor with Megara, so she dumped him. But as a result of Zagreus' escape attempts, Megara gets assigned a new position as the first boss of the game, and suddenly the two are forced into a new relationship where every now and again they beat each other to death, which inevitably means that they send each other back to the House of Hades, where they start running into each other and slowly rekindle their relationship, becoming either friends or more if you decide to take it that way. Zagreus now a humbler, more empathetic version of himself, and Megara more willing to give him respect. See the same pattern building up? An old relationship filled with bad blood is destroyed, and eventually re-emerges as a new, healthier version of itself. Thanatos was a little different. He and Zagreus are implied to have been on pretty good terms before Zagreus decided to escape, but if anything is a lot angrier with Zagreus at the start of Hades than Megara is, who's long since given up on him. Thanatos is deeply hurt by Zagreus' attempt to leave his home and Thanatos himself behind, without having even so much as said goodbye. And it takes them many meetings and conversations to patch up their friendship again. Even though Thanatos, unlike Megara who stands in opposition to Zagreus, chooses to take away time from his notoriously busy schedule to help Zagreus' escape attempts from time to time. And as they navigate the shakeup of their childhood friendship, it eventually comes out that Thanatos and Zagreus are kind of confused about the nature of their feelings for each other, which can, if you so choose, lead to them also entering a relationship. One of the coolest things about Hades is that you can have these relationships with Megara and Thanatos simultaneously, and none of them seems to mind, to say the least. The second camp of important relationships that Zagreus gets into are people that aren't part of his direct family per se, but more just strong friendships that he develops with either other residents of the house, like his combat instructor Achilles and the court musician Orpheus, and the people he comes across exploring the other levels of Hades, like Sisyphus, Eurydice, and Patroclus. The common thread that runs through all of these relationships is that as Zagreus gets to know these people, he comes to understand that there are certain contracts that bind them, dictating the rules for their stay in the afterlife. For example, Sisyphus is forced to endlessly and forever lift a boulder up to the top of a staircase, only to let it roll down and have to do it all over again. While Sisyphus is relatively at peace with his lot in the afterlife, Zagreus concludes that his eternal punishment isn't really fair. However, since Sisyphus' punishment was put in place by Hades himself, there's nobody in the afterlife both willing and able to help Sisyphus except Zagreus himself. And so, through some effort, Zagreus eventually tracks down the old contract between Sisyphus and Hades and destroys it, freeing Sisyphus from his eternal burden, literally destroying blood. The other two cases are even more connected to the idea of blood as it's understood in Homestuck, because as well as invoking ideas of violence, burdens, pacts, and covenants, there's also the standard associations we've already seen of bad blood and commitment. of ties of blood and family so strong that they can't entirely be broken, even if they cause nothing but agony. These two cases revolve around Achilles and Orpheus, and their respective romances with Patroclus and Eurydice. Both pairs of characters are famous for their literally mythic romances. The story of Orpheus descending to the Underworld to try to bring his dead wife back to life, and the story of the Trojan War and Achilles' suicidal rampage of revenge after the death of Patroclus in battle, are the backstory for these characters in the game, who now must spend the rest of eternity in their afterlives coping with the aftermath. As direct employees in the service of the House of Hades itself, Achilles and Orpheus are bound to the deepest depths of the Underworld, and so despite having eternity to look forward to, they're both fully resigned to the fact that they'll never be able to meet their beloveds, both of whom reside in layers up above. Just like with Sisyphus, Zagreus is able to dig up and destroy those contracts, allowing them to be renegotiated with slightly better terms that allow Achilles and Orpheus occasional visits to Elysium and Asphodel, respectively. But before he gets anywhere near that far, he first has to do miles and miles of legwork just trying to heal some of the damage to the relationships themselves. When he first meets her, Eurydice wants nothing to do with Orpheus, and Patroclus is so defeated, depressed, and bitter that he'll barely even talk to Zagreus. It's only through the very slow process of Zagreus coming to form bonds with all of these people individually, getting to know them, and letting them get to know him in turn, that he's eventually able to use his unique position and authority, which he only has through his blood tie with his father in the first place, to help them. This eventually culminates, of course, with the ending of the game. By overcoming and thus destroying his relationship with his father, which was previously abusive and degrading to Zagreus, he's able to meet again and again with his mother, slowly figuring out the truth about their relationship, and eventually allowing for his parents to be reunited, their old severed bond now destroyed and renewed. Not only that, but because Zagreus and Nyx roped the Olympian gods into this whole endeavor, having them help Zagreus with his escape attempts in the first place, Hades and Persephone are forced to tear off the foundation of their relationship to the Olympians, a non-relationship, an estrangement so intense that Hades and Zeus didn't communicate at all, and none of the Olympians knew that Hades and Persephone were married, not even Persephone's own mother. As a result, the Olympian gods at the top of their mountain and the Underworld gods at the bottom of the earth are finally brought together into one true family. A new era for the Pantheon and everybody involved. A new status quo in which Zagreus is still bound to his family, but now feels respected, loved, and has a unique responsibility and place in the House of Hades all his own. The prince finally able to cut out his own place in the scheme of things outside of the shadow of his father, even if the actual relationship between them can never be undone. So that's my look at young Zagreus. There's a lot more that I could say, both about our polyamorous bisexual king here and about the game itself, but I honestly just wanted to gush about hot anime Karkat for a while and hope that alone would be enough to entice you to check the game out for yourself. I hope I did that for you here, and if I did, I hope you'll let me know in the comments down below. See you all next time, and until then, keep rising. Huge thanks go out to my patrons for making this video possible. If you want to help support the channel and come join us at our awesome and growing Discord community, feel free to join us for as little as $1 a month. You can also find me on the r/Hiveswap Reddit and Discord. That's all for now, so thank you again, and as always, keep rising.